Good morning and welcome to the Senate Commerce Committee this morning. Would you please join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? Senator Chandler, will you do the honors? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We are going to open the hearing for House Bill 584. Representative Ammon, would you like to introduce the bill? I do want to make an announcement. We're not going to exec any bills today, so I wanted to let all of you know in the interest of your time. We are missing Senator Gannon and Senator Soucy, so I've decided that we're going to hold off on execing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Keith Ammon. I'm a state representative for Hillsborough District 42, which is New Boston, Mount Vernon, and Lineborough. And I'm also the vice chair of your sister committee, House Commerce and Consumer Affairs. So I'm before you today to introduce House Bill 584 and explain a little bit about it. House Bill 584 is an update to the 2022 Uniform Commercial Code amendments. These amendments, the majority of them passed last year in House Bill 1503, and that passed the Senate on a voice vote back in May. These amendments are to the Uniform Commercial Code, and they include a new article, Article 12, which was developed by the Uniform Law Commission over the period of several years. And we have an expert on that commission. He'll be testifying after me, Mr. Charles Mooney. So he'd be able to answer detailed questions. These amendments were developed to promote stability and predictability in transactions that deal with digital assets. So as the Commerce Committee in the Senate, digital assets is a growing area that's under the purview of your committee. We had the governor last year in February, he signed his first executive order of 2022, creating a commission to study cryptocurrency and digital assets. And I was the House appointee on that committee. So I served on it for approximately 10 months. Along with Senator Gary Daniels and some others from different departments in the executive branch. And that commission, I was part of generating the final report. That report was issued at the end of December. And one of the recommendations of that report's commission, it's recommendation number 5.3, and I can give you the link to that commission. It's on the governor's website, this final report. So it was recommendation 5.3 that recommended that we continue having our state keep up with these changes in the UCC Article 12. So House Bill 584 is mainly a housekeeping bill to update the statutes that we passed last year to the very current version of the UCC Article 12. So it's mainly jots and tittles that we're changing to update to the current version. So what is UCC Article 12? Well, it deals with a new concept, and it's very clever of the ULC to come up with this idea. It's the idea of a controllable electronic record, a CER. So that's a concept in Article 12. Over and over again. This is a technology agnostic term. So it's an abstract term that covers digital assets. You've probably heard of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, Solana, there's Litecoin, there's NFTs, there's stable coins. The state of Texas, there's a bill introduced that the state of Texas will introduce a stable coin that's backed by gold. So that's kind of an interesting concept, but there's lots of these things. And they provide the foundation of an emerging economy that's global, that allows for people to create and store wealth in digital assets. And the digital assets can be completely digital, or they can represent something in the physical world, such as a fiat currency like the US dollar. So the rules in UCC Article 12 deal with something that's called private law, and they're updates to other articles in the UCC, and they provide uniform rules between states when dealing with digital assets. And so in conclusion, this aims to facilitate negotiability of cryptocurrencies and address industry challenges while respecting the decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies. The adoption of these amendments by individual states will provide much needed clarity and uniformity in the digital asset market, and they benefit the industry, pave the way for more secure and reliable market for digital assets. So with that, I'll happily take any questions.
Thank you, Representative M and Senator Chanley. Okay, thank
Very
you
good.
for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
The chair will now recognize Mr. Charles Mooney. Good morning, Mr. Mooney. Thank you. Welcome.
Many thanks for this opportunity to testify today about the 2022 amendments to the Uniform Commercial Code. Just by way of introduction, I retired from the University of Pennsylvania Law School last year after 36 years on the faculty. And before that, I was in private law practice for 14 years. I was also honored to be the reporter, the principal draftsperson for these 2022 amendments. Last fall, I relocated to New Hampshire and am now happily one of Senator Chanley's constituents in Amherst. So this is my first visit to the State House, and I'm impressed and delighted to be here. The UCC is state law, but it has effectively been the commercial law of the land in the U.S. since the 1960s. Commercial law, I mean private transactional law, including many consumer transactions. It governs transactions as varied as sales and leases of goods, negotiable instruments, funds transfers, investment securities, and importantly, secured transactions and personal property. What is important is that the UCC is uniform and applies throughout the country. And this uniformity is achieved by all U.S. jurisdictions enacting the UCC without material deviations. And that uniformity is an essential benefit. New Hampshire, as Representative Ammon mentioned, has enacted an earlier draft of the 2022 amendments, and the current bill would simply update that to include the latest changes made toward the middle and end of 2022. These amendments bring the UCC fully into the 21st century. They began in 2019 with a committee that met 18 times for 2 or 3 days each, and many other small meetings. After 3 years of work, the 2022 amendments were adopted by the sponsors, the Uniform Law Commission, and the American Law Institute. They amend nearly every article of the UCC, but as Representative Ammon mentioned, the crown jewel is the new Article 12 on controllable electronic records, or CERs, a new type of property. You can think of control as the analog to possession of tangible goods, and the control as defined in Article 12 gives the kind of power over a digital asset that would be analogous to possession. CERs include virtual or cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but also assets that may be linked to other assets, such as precious metals or certain rights and privileges to access for example, artwork, so-called NFTs or non-fungible tokens. More importantly, Article 12 simply provides a uniform property law, including secured transactions for the CERs. I should add, it's also having an impact internationally, as UNIDROIT, International Institute for the Unification of Private Law in Rome, is in the process of adopting principles which follow very closely what we've done in Article 12. Currently, these assets are based on blockchain technology and public-private key cryptography, but Article 12 is drafted functionally so that it will apply to any kind of technology that might come along in the future. Finally, I understand that the committee may be considering some unofficial or informal amendments to the 2022 amendments that would eliminate the very few provisions that deal with what the amendments call electronic money. And I have these unofficial amendments with me and can actually pass them out to the committee. And some concerns have arisen around the country that somehow the UCC provisions in Article 12 promote or facilitate or encourage the adoption of a central bank digital currency. I disagree with that premise. I don't think they do. I think that misunderstands what the UCC is about. But these, what I'll call unofficial amendments to the amendment, and I was the principal drafter of those, essentially eliminate the concept of electronic money from the 2022 amendments. It simply would be silent and would not deal with that at all. If and when the United States ever had such a digital currency, I suppose the federal government would adopt its own private law rules, or if not, we could think about the UCC. But these amendments would say, for now, that's simply off the table. They don't deal with that. So with that introduction, I'd be happy to answer any questions if they're there. And after the fact, if I could be of help to any of the members of the committee, I would be happy to be available at your convenience.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. Senator Chanley?
I do appreciate the offer of answering questions as we delve into this.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 584? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 584. Let me see. We will now open the hearing on House Bill 210. And I have been asked by the Department of Insurance to introduce the bill. Should I go over there? Okay, here.
My chance. Okay. Thank you, Senator Ricciardi, for introducing the bill.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Chanley. I am introducing House Bill 210 at the request of the Insurance Department. The prime sponsor, Representative Will Impetine, wanted to be here but had a conflict. The bill passed the House on the consent calendar after a 19-0 vote in the Commerce Committee. The purpose of this bill is to clarify the statute which regulates fire insurance. The department has recently removed older statutory language that is covered by more recent statutes that have clearer language. James Fox is here from the Insurance Department to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you for your consideration of this legislation.
Thank you, Senator Ricciardi. We'll call Mr. Fox, please.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is James Fox. I'm the P&C Director at the New Hampshire Insurance Department. With me is Emily Doherty. She's a P&C attorney at the department. Bill 210 is a fairly straightforward bill. It is, as it was introduced, it's the New Hampshire Fire Statute 407. The issue what we're addressing is that there are two provisions in the fire statute currently. One's from 1960. It was amended in 1980. They didn't remove the 1960 version, so the two sections cover the same material with different language, which, in my opinion, can be a little bit confusing. The issue specifically, substantively, is that the fire statute is for monoline, it's for fire, not for anything else you might attach to a fire statute. And the provision at issue, both provisions basically say that all of these rules, which are many of the fire statute, apply to the monoline issue of fire, not to any other type of coverage you might apply. That is the sum and substance of what we're trying to do. It doesn't actually change anything. The fire statute will be regulated as it's always been regulated. It's just a matter of getting rid of some antiquated language and, on the other hand, going with more modern language.
Thank you.
So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
And Senator Chanley, any questions?
Okay, thank you
Seeing
very
none,
much.
thank you for your testimony. I don't have the sheet. Oh, thank you. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 210? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 210. We have 1 minute. We have 1 minute before we can open the next hearing. Oh. Introduce it. Yes, please. Okay. Okay.
Hearing on House Bill 479 and call upon Senator Charlie to introduce.
An interesting day. Okay. Good morning, Senator Chanley and members of the Senate Commerce Committee. I am introducing House Bill 479 at the request of the Insurance Department. The prime sponsor, Representative Will Infantine, wanted to be here but had a conflict. This bill passed the House with an amendment on the consent calendar after a 19-0 vote in the Commerce Committee. The department requested the amendment in the House to modify language on page 2 pertaining to section 2, the administration fund. After reviewing feedback from the insurance industry, the department agreed that posting electronic notices online should not suffice as adequate notice. The purpose of this omnibus-type bill makes several minor changes to 3 insurance laws. These changes will clarify the time for scheduling administrative hearings requested by licenses under RSA 400A:17, clarify how the department can provide billing notices to licenses in relation to amounts due under administration fund under RSA 400A:39, and lastly, clarify under RSA 402-J:12 that dishonest practices of insurance producers could have a negative effect on producer licenses, even if those activities are not insurance business activities. Heather Silverstein is here from the Insurance Department to give us more complete understanding of these changes and answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And we will call Ms. Silverstein, please.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Heather Silverstein. I'm General Counsel for the New Hampshire Insurance Department. Yes, thank you for introducing that, Senator Ricciardi, on behalf of the Insurance Department. This bill is really, it's amending 3 statutes of ours. So we've considered it an omnibus bill because of how it operates. The first one relates to our administrative hearings, and it's really what we're trying to do is kind of clean up what's been happening in practice. And we try to do that as we go through the year and before the next legislative session. How do we make our statutes better? For 400A17, that has to do with when licensees ask for hearings. And the way our current statute is laid out is that they have 30 days. So once they ask for hearing, they have 30 days. Oftentimes, they don't want a hearing within 30 days. And then they have to ask to amend, to extend it. And that's more time for them, more time for us as the department. So this is really setting the time limit as to, it could be 60 days out. However, if there are exigent circumstances, they could get a quicker hearing in 30 days. So that's why we wanted to change 400A17 in that way under this bill. Another statute that we're amending here is 400A39 that deals with our administration fund, which we bill our licensees every year. It basically pays for our department, that fund. And we're just trying to bring that current and allow for electronic notices instead of mailers. And so that's what that bill is all about, just providing in the statute that if we provide electronic notice with an email that the licensee has provided to the department as their contact information, that we are allowed to provide them notice with the bill with regard to that fund. And then the last statute that we're amending is 402J. That deals with our producer licensing statute. So anyone selling insurance in New Hampshire. And this is just to clarify that if someone engages in dishonest business practices, they could have their license taken away or suspended. And it doesn't have to just relate to insurance business. I always give the example of, let's say, a trustee of a trust or an executor of an estate is found to be dishonest, engaging in behavior that is dishonest. We wouldn't want them selling insurance in New Hampshire. So that's just to clarify that that is a basis for either a non-renewal or a denial of a license.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Silverstein. My question really, and this may be true, it's on the section that you're amending on administration of the fund. And I'm just curious as whether you send it out by mail or by email, when something bounces back. Obviously, by mail, you might get something back in the mail, but people change email addresses far more often, or there are errors in email addresses. Do you experience that? And do you have what is in place to deal with that?
So that would be a situation where we would, if that happened, we would definitely mail them a notice. They're supposed to keep their emails up to date with us, so we would also have a conversation with them about that. But that is definitely something that I see how it would play out once the statute is in place.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 479? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 479. Let's see what time it is. We have 4 minutes. We'll have a little 4-minute recess. 249. The chair would like to recognize Representative Jess Edwards. Of course. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Representative Jess Edwards, representing District 31 in Rockingham. That's Auburn, Candia, Chester, and Deerfield. And I'm here today to introduce House Bill 249 to you. This bill was initiated by the Department of Insurance. And so Representative Burrows and I think, looked at the idea and decided it was a pretty good one to establish some consumer protection ideas and concepts, constructs, a framework, if you will, in the pet insurance area. This is built on model legislation that's been implemented in other states. It makes it very clear that wellness programs are separate from this. And then it closes out with an amendment that was attached that's non-germane relative to restaurant owners. I'm not real excited about that. It's the very last paragraph or section in the whole thing, because I think the bill is pretty good all on its own. And I just didn't want to debate over the restaurant owners having their pets have access to the restaurants was really relevant to this otherwise very good policy discussion. And I'll leave it to Representative Burrows, who's the brains of the operation.
That's news to me. I'm Rena Burrows. I represent Carroll too, and Representative Edwards and I are the odd couple today. And again, as Representative Edwards said, the main part of the bill established regulatory standards for the pet insurance industry. Let's focus on that first. And this bill was put forth at the request of the Insurance Department. It passed in Commerce, of which I am a member, 18-1. Again, we're going to hold off on the non-germane amendment. And as Representative Edwards says, the purpose was to adopt the National Association of Insurance Commissioners model law to establish regulatory standards for the pet industry. And it's also, the key is providing protections for consumers, which was why it was in Commerce. And the bill, some of the other things that the bill covers are, it goes through definitions that are in these insurance policies, the disclosures that are going to be required by pet insurance, the right of consumers to examine and return a policy. It set forth if a medical exam might be required, or if there are pre-existing condition requirements. So that is the first part of the bill. And again, this non-germane amendment was added. The reason being that this was an amendment that would allow a restaurant owner to bring their pet into the restaurant out of the food preparation area. It was, in our hearing, we had a couple testify who adopted a dog with the understanding that the dog would be able to come to the restaurant with them. They said the dog was a huge part of their branding. The dog had an office available where it could hang out while they're doing the work. And as you know, restaurant hours are very long. And it was very important to them to be able to bring their dog, and they weren't sure they'd be able to handle the dog if they didn't have this option. So, and again, back to the original law, some of the key elements of the law, as Representative Edwards says, it addresses consumer protections, pre-existing conditions, pet wellness programs, and training requirements. I actually do support the non-germane amendment, and I hope that that you'll consider both the bill in its entirety plus the non-germane amendment. And Deputy Commissioner DJ Betancourt and James Fox are here from the Insurance Department if you have any questions that are beyond our reach.
If I could just.
Sure.
So the representative gave a nice list of the consumer protections that are built into it. I think another one that's built in is a clear expectation being presented in the policy of how the benefits will be calculated. So once the policy is in effect, it gives the consumer the guarantees that the benefits will be calculated in a fair way.
thank you for your testimony. And Senator Chanley, any questions? No, thank you. The chair will recognize DJ Betancourt.
Good morning, Senators. It's nice to see you all. If I may just detour for a moment, it's nice to see Senator Chanley. Back in 2020 and 2021, we spent a lot of time together over a conference call with the governor's Economic Reopening Task Force during the pandemic, and we worked hard. I wouldn't want to relive it, but I think we did good work. In any event, for the record, my name is DJ Betancourt, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. I'm joined by two of our subject matter experts. To my right is James Fox, the head of our Property and Casualty Division, and Emily Doherty, our legal beagle, pardon the pun, on the P&C side. And we are excited to talk with you this morning about pet insurance in support of House Bill 249. In 1982, the first pet insurance policy sold in the United States was issued to television legend Lassie by the Veterinary Pet Insurance Company. So that is your trivia for the morning. But since then, the pet insurance industry has exploded. The North American Pet Health Insurance Association states that the industry has exceeded $2.83 billion in premium at the end of 2021, and that the industry has more than doubled between 2018 and 2022. They indicate that over 4.41 million pets are currently insured across North America. We are here today because while this market is fairly new, the regulatory framework around it from an insurance perspective is light. And in light of its explosive growth, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners recognized the growing need for more standard and comprehensive pet insurance frameworks. To that end, as you heard from the representatives who testified previously, the NAIC developed the 2022 Pet Insurance Model Act, and this legislation seeks to adopt that Model Act into New Hampshire law, which will bring many of the same rules of the road and consumer protections to pet insurance that are currently in place for most other insurance products that are available to consumers. Some of the key provisions that I would highlight include detailed coverage definitions, disclosures, policy condition, sales for wellness programs, best practices for insurance producer training, related regulations and violations. And I would stop just for a moment to point out that there's a very important distinction to be made, that this product is a property and casualty product. Though it deals with the health of an animal, for better or worse, in this country, we treat our pets as property. And that's not to insult anybody, it just is how it is in our statutes today. So this law would make it very clear where people go when they're looking to understand what the consumer protections are for this particular product. It also includes specific requirements that apply to pet insurance policies regarding how the product may be sold, solicited, negotiated, or offered in the state, standards that the policies or certificates of insurance that are sold or issued for delivery in the state must comply with. And at the same time, though, the Act provides flexibility for the industry to fashion products that are diverse and attentive to the needs of consumers. So we wanted to make sure that we were striking the proper balance between not stifling innovation around these products, but also making sure that there are consumer protections so that people are getting the benefit of the policy that they are buying. There are some other standards here, but I think the other representatives covered them well. So I would just stop for a moment to kind of give you very briefly an overview of how the NAIC approaches a model law, because it is no small process. The fastest model law I think the NAIC has ever put out still took over a year to get from conceptual thought and discussion to actually passing it out. And the process that they use brings together a wide diversity of stakeholders, folks from the industry to folks like us who ultimately administer the insurance laws of the state. It was a very collaborative process. There was good give and take, and at the end of the day, they arrived at a product that everybody was very supportive of. So with that said, I'll just turn briefly to James and Emily to see if there's anything else that was critical that I missed. They're telling me I did okay. So I'm in your hands, Senator.
Any questions or comments from the committee members? Senator Chanley?
Thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony, and it is good to see you as well after in person again.
Yes.
My question, and I may have missed this, may have been stated by Representative Edwards, Burrs, or you, but how many states have these kinds of policies right now in this model policy in place?
So the state of Maine was the first one to really jump on the ball. They passed it last year. I think another state just last week joined us. I think it may have been Mississippi that joined us. There's no hesitation, as far as I know, on the part of the states to adopt the model law. I think it's just a matter of when everybody's legislative session is taking place and how quickly they're able to move. So we're here at the first opportunity that we had, given our particular dynamics.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to speak a minute about the non-germane part, because having a dog on the premises of a restaurant, what are the rules for health implications?
Sure. So I'll just take a step back for a moment and once again make it clear that was not our idea. We're the model pet insurance law piece of this. The non-germane piece came in during the Commerce Committee's process in the House, but obviously we followed it very carefully. My understanding of watching their deliberations very carefully is that there was a statute that was on the books for several years that basically, it seemed to have stemmed from this idea that the owner of a bed and breakfast lives in the bed and breakfast as well as rents out the other rooms in that facility to others. They had found themselves in a position where they couldn't even have their own animals in essentially their foyer or living room, though it is a shared space, because of the rules that we had in place at that time. So the legislature, I want to say they said it was back in 2016, somewhere in that area, made this change. It was actually driven by Representative Ed Butler, who I'm sure some of you know well. I'm not quite sure how it came about, but as the legislature was dealing with service animals last year, they accidentally, in trying to achieve one policy, messed up. And they took out the entirety of the statutory provisions that allowed for those bed and breakfast owners and restaurant owners to have their dogs in their facility under those certain parameters. Those being, they could not be in the food preparation area. If a service animal came in to the facility, that dog had to go someplace else separate and apart. So it seemed that there was an inadvertent change to the statutes last year that messed up something that seemed to have been working quite well for a number of years. And so I think what Representative Hunt and others were trying to do was to return the status quo prior to the mix-up. So that was my recollection and understanding of it.
Correct.
All right.
The exact language goes back in that was in prior to the change. When I actually looked at this, I was like, why are they putting this bill in with this exact language as currently? Because I was looking at an old version. So it is just a reenacting what was there prior to the change. Now it has both sections, really.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you all.
Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 249? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 249. Let me see what time it is. Oh. We will now open the hearing on House Bill 150. The chair will recognize Representative Mike Bortz. there's someone to introduce this bill? Okay, Senator Chanley, thank you. Thank you, Senator Chanley, for introducing the bill for representative boards.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Shannon Chandley. I represent District 11 in the Senate, and those are the towns of Amherst, Merrimack, Milford, and Wilton. And I will come before you to introduce House Bill 150 relative to the certification of a collective bargaining unit. And I'll leave the testimony for those who are here to do so.
Thank you, Senator Chanley. The chair will recognize Alan Raft. Okay. Good morning.
And sorry, thank you. You want me to restart? My name is Alan Raff, and I come before you on behalf of the New Hampshire AFL-CIO and its over 35,000 members to urge you to vote ought to pass on House Bill 150. This bill simply reduces the number of employees needed to certify a bargaining unit from 10 to 5. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation with sponsors on both sides of the aisle. What's important about this bill, though, is the impact that it can have on the recruitment and retention for public employees. Specifically, that will assist in recruiting and retaining our public safety employees, which includes police, firefighters, EMT workers. Our police departments and fire departments, as you know, are having a really difficult time recruiting and retaining workers, and this is one way to change that. With the passage of this bill into law, 5 individuals would be able to negotiate for things like working conditions, hours, and their wages. These workers keep us safe every day of the year, and they do their job so that we can do ours. So the number of employees needed to certify a bargaining unit was brought to 10 employees in 1975. And then in 2008, the number was reduced to 5 employees. And then again, in 2011, the number was brought back up to 10. Looking at the legislative history, these numbers were pulled out of thin air and seem to be entirely arbitrary. And given the number that is required for certification of a bargaining unit in the private sector being 2 employees, the reduction from 10 to 5 employees that this bill calls for is not really extreme. If there's any opposition to this bill, I imagine that they may argue that it will be more expensive for employers. However, studies show that there is no significant impact whatsoever on the cost of doing business with a smaller bargaining unit as it relates to a municipality in this case. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you guys have.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very
Thank you.
much. The chair will now recognize John McAllister. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Good morning, Madam Chair and the honorable members of the committee. For the record, my name is John McAllister. I'm Secretary Treasurer for the Professional Firefighters of New Hampshire, and I'm also a 23-year member of the Nashville Fire Department. The Professional Firefighters of New Hampshire represent over 2,000 active and retired members of the fire service and paramedics throughout the state of New Hampshire. We are the preeminent lobbying group for those individuals. I'm here in support of House Bill 150. House Bill 150 is a simple bill. All we're asking is to drop that number from 10 to 5. As everybody knows, in the state of New Hampshire, the majority of our fire departments, full-time members, are under 10 members. So currently, with the International Association of Firefighters, you can become a collective bargaining agreement or a union affiliated to the IAFF with only 3 members. So that becomes a problem in New Hampshire, where if we organize a local of 3 members or to 10, they're unable to bargain. They're unable to collectively bargain and negotiate a contract. The reason why this is important to our members is, as Alan Raff had just mentioned, it is going to help tremendously with recruitment and retention. There is a significant problem in the fire service with recruitment and retention. And currently, throughout the state, we have other fire departments that are taking other members from other fire departments to hire them. So that's a problem. And we're realizing that a lot of those members are coming from these smaller locals. And the reason why they're coming from these smaller fire departments is because they don't have the ability to negotiate a contract. They don't have that ability to sit at the table and negotiate safe working conditions, benefits, or pay raises. So these members are leaving to go to larger fire departments throughout the state. House Bill 150 will not change any of the laws, anything significant in the RSA 273A8. As we said, it's just going to drop that number from 10 to 5, which had been done in 2008, but had been changed in 2011. In 2008, when that change was made, the Professional Firefighters of New Hampshire, as well as the International Association of Firefighters, had organized some of the smaller locals in the state. So currently we have 3 locals that are under that threshold of 10. So they are unable to collectively bargain. We have, for instance, a local in Newport, New Hampshire that has 5 members. There are times, multiple times, that those members are responding to calls with one individual on that piece of apparatus. So if you think about that, they have one person who's running medical calls or fire calls and going into people's homes alone. And as I spoke to the union president from Newport, he said his biggest concern is actually going to illegal burns when they get called out to a campfire and people might be out back and they don't tend to take too kindly when they ask them to shut down the fire. And so that can be a problem when you have one individual on that piece of apparatus. The International Association of Firefighters, as I had mentioned, will organize a local with 3 members. I bring that up because it's important to understand that with what you get out of the International Association of Firefighters is tremendous support for working safer work conditions, bargaining contracts. And with that being said, these locals have the ability, because they could join another union, maybe the AFSCME or the Teamsters within the municipality that they work at. But this bill is more significant for us because it gives those members the ability to work under an organization that is like-minded individuals who are working for the same causes that we are working for. So that's why we're here in support of House Bill 150. I thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I did submit written testimony as well. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Thank you. Members of the committee, any questions or comments? Senator Ennis?
Good morning.
Morning.
Just a quick question. I'm thinking about the size of these departments. When you have 10 firefighters, I can see the need for collective bargaining. If you have 3 or 4, couldn't that just come down to working with each firefighter and reaching agreements with them? And I guess a sort of follow-on question to that is, if they're losing firefighters to these towns, larger towns that may be paying more, have better benefits, whatever, doesn't that provide incentive for those communities to step up and raise their wages and benefits and so on? I guess I'm really trying to understand the critical need to bring it down to 5 from 10.
Thank you for your question, Senator. And to answer your second question first, yes, I would believe that would incentivize these municipalities to pay their members more.
Yeah.
It's not happening though.
Okay.
It's not happening. We had, for instance, Wolfboro, New Hampshire, had been an IAFF affiliate since the 1990s. They only had 8 members for the longest time. They could never get to the threshold of 10.
Right.
Wolfboro, for the longest time, had been trying to negotiate with the town, and they would not allow it because they were not at that threshold.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the other unions in the city or in the town were able to negotiate, and those firefighters were basically getting what was left at the end of the day.
I see.
Wolfboro is one of those locals. I bring Wolfboro up because it's one of those locals that left the International Association of Firefighters for that reason, because they were not able to negotiate a contract. They joined AFSCME. AFSCME has since been able to get them a contract, they're at that 10 threshold of firefighters, but it's a process to come back into the International Association of Firefighters now as well.
Right.
So yeah, you would think that that would help, but it doesn't help. And we have these locals that are out there. As I said, Newport is another significant local where those members, they're not able to sit at that table. They don't have a seat at that table to negotiate those contracts.
How many firefighters are there in Newport?
How many firefighters are there? There are 5 full-time firefighters.
Really?
Yes.
I would have
Yep.
thought more. Okay.
Yep. And basically, to answer your first question, the benefit of having the ability to negotiate at 5 members is exactly what kind of piggybacks off of your first the first question I had answered, and it allows those members to go to the table, have a seat at that table, and negotiate better manpower.
Yeah.
Maybe more members on the apparatus. Collective bargaining is bigger than just pay and benefits. It's about safe working conditions. And I think that that's a key right now for some of these smaller locals. We currently have 3 locals in the state of New Hampshire that fall under that threshold of 10, and they're unable to collectively bargain.
For the record, I belong to the faculty union at UNH, so
Oh, okay.
I understand.
All right. Thank
Yeah, I'm
you.
just trying to wrap my head around the whole thing and why bring it down so low. But that that helps. Thank you.
And to piggyback off that, Senator, it's significant in the state of New Hampshire because the majority, maybe not the majority, but a lot of our locals, a lot of our fire departments have less than 10 members.
Yeah.
So we have a few locals, fire departments that have reached out to us and asked us to how they become affiliated with the International Association of Firefighters. Unfortunately, we explain the entire process, but when it comes time, when we have to explain to them that they can't collectively bargain, they can't negotiate a contract,
Right.
it doesn't,
Yeah, I understand.
it just doesn't work for them. So their option is either to go to another local, or try to organize under the IFF and try to get that number bigger.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 150? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 150. 158. And we will now open the hearing for House Bill 42.
May I distribute this?
I'm just waiting for the sheet. I don't have the sheet. The chair recognizes Representative Laurel Stavis.
Good morning, and
morning.
thank you, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you very much for allowing me to present this bill this morning. HB 42 passed the House Commerce Committee with a unanimous ought to pass as amended vote and went to the consent calendar where it was adopted by the House on March 22nd. And I thank you for considering this legislation at this point. HB 42 makes 2 changes to RSA 292, the statute that governs voluntary associations, after Section 8.1 of that RSA, and those deal with the powers of the association, the voluntary association. One of the new sections governs voting on bylaws and articles of incorporation by increasing the threshold to a 2/3 majority if one owner acquires more than 50% of units in a homeowners association. The other change ensures that if planning board approval was required to establish the association, any vote to dissolve it must also have that same planning board's approval. Currently, that is not the case. A little bit of background, almost 20% of New Hampshire residents live in homeowners associations of some sort, whether they're resident-owned mobile home courts, high-end homeowners, private homeowners associations, A large and growing number of our residents live in these kinds of communities. They are formed under RSA 292 because members enter into a voluntary agreement to operate for the mutual benefit of the members. They also provide benefits to the general public, such as public access to walking trails and maintenance of the community infrastructure, funded by individual homeowners and relieving the municipality of a considerable expense that would otherwise have to be raised in taxes. Homeowners associations also fund upkeep of other infrastructure such as sewer and waste systems, roads and sidewalks, and trash removal. Many HOAs also contribute to the state's conservation activities by some municipalities' requirement that 50% of the development's land remain open in perpetuity and free of development. And as HOAs of all kinds proliferate throughout the state, HB 42 provides a common sense mechanism that protects individual homeowners and local municipalities while preserving the purposes for which the community was created in the first place, providing opportunities for home ownership in communities where it is in the owner's best interest to maintain the structural well-being of the development, and supporting badly needed housing in a municipality without raising tax rates to support the costs associated with these developments. So I thank you for consideration of this bill that makes these two minor changes to RSA 292, and I do have written testimony that I would like to distribute, if I may.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions, I'm sorry.
Senator Chandler?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. I am curious regarding the second portion of the bill and what the procedure is today. That can it simply be dissolved without any kind of hearing before the planning board, but they do need to have some kind of public hearing? How does it stand now?
The way it stands now, under the current law, is that it is a one member, one vote situation. And the members constitute individual homeowners. So if one owner acquires 50% or more of the units in the development, they by default have the majority vote and can then hold a special meeting to vote to change the bylaws, to dissolve the association. So it will only be a meeting of the homeowners, not the general public.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm asking about the requirement that the portion 2, the requirement that that there be a hearing before a planning board or land use body.
Thank you. Thank you for that question and the clarification. So I sit on the Lebanon Planning Board, way up north there. And before a homeowners association can take shape, the developer must sit before the planning board and present the plans for the development. Those plans must include, by our own regulations and by most municipalities' regulations, a phase in, giving up of the developer to the individual unit owners control of the association. And that control is vested in a board of directors, a volunteer board of directors made up of members of the homeowners association. So if someone owns 75 homes in a 100 home development, that person has 75% of the vote. And so in the planning board's original formulation, it is a one homeowner, one vote situation. And those are the rules under which homeowners associations are approved by local planning boards. But to dissolve them currently under law does not require any planning board approval. And HB 42 proposes to fix that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
The chair will now recognize Tom DeRosa. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Tom DeRosa, for the record, I'm here on behalf of the New Hampshire Planners Association. We are in support of this bill. We just recommend one small change on line 11 where it says, before that same planning board or land use body, that we change body to board. So it would be land use board, as generally on the local level, it's boards and committees and commissions rather than a body that would make that decision.
Thank you. Do you have
Thank
any
you.
questions?
I have to ask for that again. I've gone to another bill. Can you repeat what you said there?
Sure. So on line 11, we would change where it says that same planning board or land use body, that we would change body to land use board rather than body. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to House Bill 42? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 42. And we will now open the hearing on House Bill 261.
Am I recognized, Madam Chair?
Just 1 minute till I get the sheet, please.
Of course.
Okay. Good morning. The chair will recognize Representative Ellen Reed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, honorable members. For the record, my name is Ellen Reed. I represent Rockingham 10, that's Newmarket and Newfields. So current New Hampshire law, there are no protections for victims of domestic violence or stalking, or for people acquiring a new disability that makes their current unit inaccessible to them. There are no legal protections for these people to leave these properties that are unsafe for them to inhabit. And having had a personal experience in my past with domestic violence, and also having a constituent who is still currently fighting her landlord because she lost the use of her legs and is living in a third floor walk up and has been stuck in this apartment for months now. I wanted to put this bill in. So I drew directly from Tennessee law. I'm originally from Tennessee and had spoken with Tennessee legislators, and this had already passed in Tennessee. So the bill before you, as it passed the House, is the Tennessee law, the Tennessee language. And what it does is it allows victims of domestic violence or stalking to leave their lease without a penalty. So just so you're aware, at the federal level for public housing, the documentation level required for a victim of domestic violence to leave their lease is simply an attestation. There were members of the House committee that wanted to increase this bill to the point that someone could simply attest to the fact that they had been a victim of domestic violence and match that federal level. If this committee was so inclined, I would be in full support of that. However, I worked with 5 different members together as a group, bipartisan members of the committee, through several iterations of an amendment, which is now before you, which not only addresses some of the issues I'm about to bring up, but also all the points that opposition, and I'm just going to go through those. Having said that, if you wanted to make it stronger and bring it up to the federal level, I would be in support. But the committee did not feel that they wanted to do that. And in general, they actually thought that the Tennessee law was a little bit too, I guess, squishy. So the amendment before you addresses that. The amendment says, rather than any police report or any documentation of an incident of domestic violence, it has to be a permanent order of protection. So that's after, not an emergency order of protection, but after it's gone to a hearing and a judge has ruled that this person needs to be protected. And the original language from Tennessee says 60 days. So a person would get their documentation, whatever it is, police report, and they would have 60 days to tell the landlord they want to leave. The amendment says anytime after the lease is signed. So What it means is that you either would have to get an order of protection after you signed the lease or the violation of the order. So you already got an order of protection, moved to a different apartment, this person found you, caused a problem, you would then be allowed to leave. Further, one of the things that the committee had brought up was a slight inconvenience / slightly increased cost of business for the landlord. In the hearing, there wasn't a lot of opposition from the Landlords Association, and I'll get to one of the couple of points they did bring up, but in general, they seemed favorable for the concept. But members of the committee did feel like it would be prudent to somehow make the landlord whole. So in this, for both the domestic violence and the disability piece, there is an early termination fee not to exceed 1/4 of 1 month's rent, and that shall be prorated over the term of the lease. So the longer that the person has stayed, the less they pay, because really the only increase in cost is that the landlord has to clean and you do the carpets and paint sooner than they expected. That's really the only increase in cost. We do have a nearly 0% occupancy or vacancy rate right now. So in this current market, there's no expectation that landlord would have a difficulty finding another tenant. So also, one of the things that was raised up was the consideration for privacy. I went to OLS repeatedly asking them to look at the privacy section. They felt it was good the way it is, but I did have them reword it. So in the amendment, paragraph Roman numeral 5, unless otherwise required by law or court of competent jurisdiction, a landlord shall not reveal any identifying information concerning a tenant who has terminated a rental or lease agreement pursuant to this section without written consent of the tenant, as used in this paragraph. Identifying information is any information that could reasonably use to identify or locate the former tenant or household member, including name, home or work address, telephone number, social security number. So I feel like we really went into depth. This does still allow landlords to, for example, pursue eviction proceedings, because obviously they would have to file that in court. The disability piece, which is after the domestic violence piece, the amended version, so the original version said any medical documentation that would make it so that the tenant was unable to enjoy the unit. We know that enjoy is a legal term for the ability to properly use a unit. The Landlords Association was worried that that would be misinterpreted to mean like, oh, I don't like the color of the walls. So we used the word inaccessible. Knowing that that's a legal term that we understand the definition for, I still wanted to cover our bases. And also we raised the documentation level for disability to only documentation from a medical doctor, a PA, or an RN. So not like, I guess, less official medical sources. And then it has to be, the disability, it's a long-term disability that has to have occurred after the signing of the lease, and it has to be expected to continue past the end of the lease. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of all of this. I'm happy to take questions, but I just wanted to reiterate that we currently have no protections. Other states do have protections for people who are essentially being forced by our system to live in dangerous situations with people who pose a threat to them, or in a location where someone who poses a threat to them knows where they live, or is completely inaccessible and unsafe. And I guess in a market sense, they're being forced to use a product that is unsafe for them. So I really hope that the committee would consider this bill and consider having this amendment drafted. One last thing. Some of my friends across the aisle wanted to put into this amendment. It didn't make it in, but I fully supported it. The clarification that a judge that is giving a protective order to a victim can put in that the perpetrator is financially responsible for this early termination fee. The judge can already do that, but I think it's great to clarify that and put that in, so because it's not really being considered, I don't think, at this point. So I have language from my friends across the aisle for that. So I would be happy to work with you all to improve this amendment. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will recognize, I'm sorry, I can't read your handwriting, Representative. Yes. Good morning.
Thank you very much. I'm Representative Timothy Horgan. I represent Stratford County District 10, the towns of Durham, home of the University of New Hampshire, as Senator Innes knows very well. So the gentlelady from Newmarket mentioned a large number of amendments, and I was on the policy committee that heard the bill, and we did indeed consider all those. And when we got to the final vote, and not to be too partisan about it, but the Republicans basically rejected every amendment that we brought, but then they argued against the bill on the floor on the basis of things that we had, that Democrats were in fact willing to compromise on. But I think the bill is introduced is an improvement, even if it passes as is, a great improvement over the law as it exists now. And we heard there's certainly with Ryan Spons and the others, we're certainly willing to help you out with any amendments you may want. One thing I'm going to say, this is in the context of the rental housing market, which is always, ever since I can remember, has always been heavily slanted. It's very much been a seller's market, or a landlord's market. Right now, that's just about as extreme as it can get. It rounds up it's not quite 100% of the inventory is rented out every given time, but it's so much, if you round it up, it's 100%. It's like over 99.5% from what I've heard. Rents are, I think everybody agrees, much higher than what the average working person can afford. So they're renting out they're selling their entire inventory at basically the highest prices that people can afford. And I know landlording's not an easy job. I've dabbled in it myself, but still, they're probably just about more fortunate than anybody who's in any other line of business. So they actually, I think it's a tough job. Can be emotionally draining, but they have it pretty good. And even though I think this bill is necessary on one level, another level, I'm wondering why would this ever be necessary? If somebody's been a family, if the tenants have been a victim of domestic violence and they don't want to stay in the apartment, why would the landlord ever want to stop them from moving somewhere else where they feel more comfortable? And likewise, if somebody has, a disability that they didn't have when they moved in and they don't feel they can stay in the apartment while dealing with the disability, once again, why would you want somebody to stay who can't even get into the apartment? It just makes no sense to me. So I think even in the absence of any law with this, I would think any sensible person would accommodate those situations. And the law is still useful in case of a landlord who's not reasonable. And of course it does set up a framework. But I don't quite understand why you would want to keep tenants on your property against their will when they've suffered something as catastrophic as that and they don't want to be there, especially given the fact that these tenants can be very easily replaced. It's not going to take, it's a fairly minor inconvenience having an apartment become vacant before the end of the lease. There's usually somebody out there who wants the apartment. And so that's basically, I think you should basically pass this bill, and certainly there are a number of ways you can improve it, but even as is, it's good. And I certainly happily supported it on the floor of the House, and although it just barely made it by a few votes. But so that's my testimony. So I said this is a common sense bill, and you should pass it with or without amendments. So thanks.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks.
The chair will recognize Nick Norman.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I do have written testimony. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Nick Norman. I'm an advocate for housing providers. Our organization of landlord associations throughout the state are coordinated through our work here with the legislative initiative for landlord tenant law, probably about 3,500 landlords across the state that's a part of our collaboration. So there's, I have not seen this amendment that the sponsor was talking about, and we would love to see that amendment because it does sound like it addresses some of our concerns. But I'm prepared to talk about the original bill because, thank you, that's what we have. That's what we know about. So as it's originally written, there's a huge host of problems with the bill. I probably won't have enough time to go through all of it with you today because there's so many. But I do have this written testimony that I would like for you to read through. And I'd be happy to speak with anyone afterwards, the hearing as well. I do want to let you know that this was debated heavily in the House. I was involved in monitoring a lot of that. There was some attempts at amendments. Nothing could be agreed to. No amendment could be agreed to by the House committee. Every vote came out 10-10. Every attempt to do anything with the bill came out 10-10. It came with no recommendation to the House. And I noticed today that I have a mistake in the handout I just gave you. In the first paragraph, it says the House voted ought to pass 183 to 191. It was 193. Sorry for that typo. The vote was 193 to 191. So like it just squeaked through. So there's no agreement on this at all because it has so many issues. So in general, the big problem with this is that if you allow the tenant to just terminate the lease, it leaves the landlord essentially holding the bag. So you could have all kinds of situations in real estate. Real estate's not just one little simple thing. Real estate residential rentals are extremely complex. Are we talking about one tenant? Are we talking about two tenants cohabitating together? Are we talking about a couple? Are we saying that the domestic victim could terminate and leave the perpetrator in the unit? That's what we're saying. I mean, that's probably the most likely situation. And now what's the landlord going to do with that? You see what I mean about holding the bag? So now the landlord has a perpetrator in the unit that's quite likely a very violent person that the rest of the building is afraid of and doesn't want to be around. If there's an option for the victim terminating, the landlord should have the right and ability to have all the people leave. All the people, all the tenants, all the belongings, and start over. And there's a large cost to that, a very large cost. And that cost is not addressed in this bill. What happens if you have, and of course it's common, two people renting an apartment, one leaves, now what about that security deposit? There's a strict law about how housing providers must treat and handle the security deposit precisely. So if this original bill in one of these provisions was saying security deposit has to go back to the person leaving, well, what about the other person that's still there that maybe they paid the security deposit or maybe there's some agreement between them? There's a lot to figure out here. You could leave a housing provider in a situation where by the law they have to give the security deposit here, but by the law they have to treat the other person fairly with the security deposit, and now they're in the middle and violating it no matter what they do. And violations on security deposit law are pretty hefty. There's a lot of things in the bill that's just far too vague. Maybe this amendment helps to address that. I'm interested to look this over. But just having a police report or just having the original temporary order would leave this ripe for situations where tenants could abuse the privilege and seek to terminate their lease when actually maybe the allegations are false. Even in the original bill, it said in there, not a proven thing, but an alleged thing. There was language that says the apartment is no longer suitable. That's very vague. I don't know if this takes care of that. There's a thing in the bill that says the person leaving would give written notice. That's not defined. What does that mean? Sometimes we get a little slip of paper on a kitchen counter that says, see ya, I'm gone. That's written notification. Also, I can only, in the amount of time we have, go through a few things, but there's so many. There's federal case law relating fair housing that a person that's disabled can get a reasonable accommodation. I'm sure you know that languaging in the fair housing, that a termination of a lease is a reasonable accommodation. In the notes, I've got several court cases that already give those rights to people with disabilities. So the entire disability section of this bill is actually not needed. It's already covered. And because of the case law, there's definitions of what qualifies and what doesn't. It's already been established. The way that the original section on new disability was written, the person with the new disability would be allowed to give a 1-day notice. Read through it, you'll see it. And we think that would be completely unreasonable. And I noticed there was some talk about privacy during the talk of the amendment. The way that the bill was originally written, no information could be given out related to the victim. That means they're completely immune from any legal process. Also, I will answer what Representative Horgan brought up. I speak to many, many landlords in the collaboration of all these associations. And I can tell you myself and those would not sit in a situation of someone's in danger, being a victim, and not work something out that they could leave. But it needs to be something that's worked out and the costs are handled and, you know, it's all taken care of and the perpetrator's not there. I know landlords in our group that have thousands of units, and over decades, they've only had maybe 4 or 5 cases of something like this come up, and in every single case, they work it out to protect the victim, protect their business, and work out a deal. This is already handled. And why would a landlord want to have a domestic violence situation continuing in their residence? Just like Horgan said, Representative Horgan said, no one would want that. It's bad for the victim. It's bad for all the other tenants. It's bad for business. You start losing tenants because they don't want to live near it. So maybe the amendment addresses enough concerns that we can work with something. I don't know yet. I'd have to look through this, but I'm not sure that the bill is needed, and I think the market already takes care of it. I guess I'll have to stop. There was a lot that was very vague in the original bill, and I'd be very happy to take questions. There's a lot here, and I would like for you to take the time to read through it. And please give me a call afterwards when there's more time that we can talk.
Does the committee have any questions? I have one.
Yes.
Mr. Norman. So I want to be sure I understood you correctly. You said that there already are provisions in the law for these situations and for disabilities, and it's already there, and it's something that wouldn't require any further laws or because you can handle it yourself. So
yes,
wouldn't that be the same as a landlord? There are already laws in place for eviction as well. So where I guess I'm going with this is it sounds like you're saying things can be worked out.
Things are routinely worked out already for victims of domestic violence. I had, I think, one situation with over my years. I have 48 units. I've been a landlord for 35 or so years. And we don't want to have someone forced to stay in a violent, unsafe situation. It's not good for them. It's not good for my business. It's not good for the other tenants that are there. So much better to just work out something where all sides of this are taken care of. If you put into law something that says, I've got a special situation, I can blow away this lease, I'm leaving the housing provider holding the bag with a bad tenant and vacancy, damage, very expensive, by the way, and you have to follow some eviction process that takes 2 months to recover and start over. It can be very expensive.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, well, I guess I was just, I probably shouldn't be mixing up bills, but I was thinking about 117 and
Yes.
so I was just thinking about the opinion of when it's one way versus another.
Okay.
I think you answered my question.
And specifically, the law already with the case law about fair housing provides for people with disabilities,
Okay, thank you.
but not as much for domestic
Okay.
victim violence. And we're saying there's not enough of an issue frequently enough, and everyone works it out anyway. And
Thank you. You
yeah,
did
got it.
answer my question. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, the chair will recognize Lindsay Lincoln. Good morning, welcome.
Oh, sorry about that. I did want to provide some information about what current laws exist in these situations, their federal protections for tenants who are victims of domestic violence, and then the protections available for tenants with disabilities. And then I also wanted to go through a few concerns that we have with the bill as it's currently drafted. So first, there is the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. That's a federal law that provides protections for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and it protects them from being denied assistance, being terminated from any federal programs, being allowed to, in this situation, break their leases. And it applies to a fairly broad range of federal housing subsidy programs, ranging from the public housing program to tax credit properties must comply with VAWA. Any Section 8 voucher holder has the protections of VAWA. And so that's the federal law for victims of domestic violence. There's also the Federal Fair Housing Act that protects individuals against discrimination based on sex as well as on disability. So for example, the situation in Section C of the bill could be addressed by asking for reasonable accommodation to terminate your lease. I will say the bill, the Fair Housing Act, unlike VAWA, applies regardless of federal subsidy. There are certain exemptions from the Fair Housing Act, and it's similar to the distinction between restricted and unrestricted housing in RSA 540, so the eviction statute. For example, an owner-occupied building with 3 or fewer units would be exempt from the Fair Housing Act, but by and large, it applies to most housing, most rental housing. Okay, so those are the federal protections. The current state law, what would happen in a situation where the person is in a fully private unit, no federal subsidy. If the tenant breaks the lease, they could be liable for the remainder of the contract rent. If it's a month-to-month, that's not really an issue. If it's a 12-month lease term, they're in month 4, that creates a problem. However, under the laws that exist, landlords have a duty to mitigate their damages, meaning if a victim flees and the unit is vacant, the landlord has an obligation to really engage in good faith efforts to re-rent that unit to another person. As has been, I think, testified to, we have a less than 0.5% vacancy rate. So that is not going to be a difficult situation for a landlord in the current housing market to get a new tenant into the unit and therefore relieve the fleeing tenant from the obligations of the remainder of the contract term. Okay, so that's kind of the landscape that exists. I want to talk about specific concerns with the drafting of the bill and really compare it to VAWA. which is a really robust statute, has robust implementing regulations. So one issue I see with the bill off the bat is the definition of household member. So it's limited to a family member of the tenant who lives in the same household. You could imagine a situation where you have two roommates living together. One of them is a victim of stalking by a neighbor in the complex. Because they're not in a family relationship, the victim would, by the terms of this bill, be allowed to leave, not have to pay the remainder of the rent. But the person remaining, on whom they rely on each other to be able to afford the rent. And so that would put a situation where the household can't leave in its entirety, but would want to, and you're kind of requiring the victim to stay behind. Where under VAWA, for example, it's an affiliated individual would be the definition. So any other lawful occupant in the household would be allowed to obtain the protections of VAWA. Let's see. Also, VAWA allows for self-certification. So that's a less burdensome form of proof for victims. Obtaining protective orders, police reports, and those things can be more challenging for someone who is a legitimate victim of domestic violence. And I would certainly not support any arguments that people are going to lie about on their self-certification form. VAWA also has more robust confidentiality protections that I think would be important to explore with this bill. There are also some terms used in the bill, and I'm not quite sure what they mean, and would be interested to get some examples of those. For example, that they're not liable for. They're liable for the rent within the remaining rent for that 30-day period, but also any previous obligations outstanding on the termination date. I'm not sure what that refers to, so I would think that should be a bit better defined. So that's really all I wanted to testify to, but of course I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chair will now recognize Jessica Margison.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak a few words on this bill. This bill means a lot to me, one, because I've had to face certain aspects of it, and two, I quite regularly come in contact with it in my work as a tenant organizer with Granite State Organizing Project. You guys got to hear from a gentleman named Travis Gendron in this past year who was able to make it up here to speak on a different bill. He suddenly had a stroke one day and lost all use of his limbs and was in the hospital, then wheelchair, could not return to his third floor apartment. So this bill helps those that are suddenly disabled with such health conditions that require immediately that they cannot be there, not for someone that's slowly declining in health. So there's such medical things like strokes, traumatic brain injuries, all sorts of things that would make someone have to leave their place. Travis was lucky though, because I was at a Board of Mayor and Alderman hearing and I heard him and I found him the next day and I got him in a hotel with the NHREP fund we had. And it took us a year to work him into public housing. But I had the ability to catch him when he fell. Not many people have that. So this is going to help those vast majority of people that can't find someone or don't have a good landlord. Travis had a good landlord, thank goodness. There's plenty of tenants I help that don't. Just like a family that came in last week that would help their daughter who's fleeing from a domestic violence situation. He just recently got out of jail. The person has severe medical issues and needs to stay with her parent. Her parent lives in a HUD subsidized housing and is now under threat of eviction. So one thing I did want to bring up is that I would hope we could possibly add protections for someone sheltering someone fleeing for their safety or taking someone in who can't reach their third floor apartment. Many of these tenants then have to go to someone else who is a tenant and put their housing in jeopardy. And then I'm scrambling trying to find situations for both. So that's one key part that could be added, possibly under RSA 540:2C, failure of tenant to comply. No, not that one, sorry. maybe that was for something different. But maybe something could be added. That one I just mentioned, when you're talking about DBs, as Norman brought up with the reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications. And then he mentioned, well, then you have the person that attacked the other person left in the household. For something like that, the landlord has the protections to be able to have a 7-day eviction when the person is a threat to the other tenants that are at the property. I wish the lawyer that was up before me could speak to that. So if the landlord was concerned by that, so this bill is not going to leave the perpetrator in the place. It's going to allow for that person to get it to safety and not affect others. My DV case did not affect my neighbors. It was all private. It was multiple emails, text messages, multiple things. So my neighbors weren't affected in any way, but I was terrified enough to put all my furniture up against my door till I could get out of there and get to a safer place. I ended up in a 5-year protection order after 2 extensions because of noncompliancy and safety issues. My address was constantly being told. So I faced a constant, every time I moved, it was so expensive for me, I got in a worse and worse and worse place. So what can happen is a situation's compounded by the restrictions that we have left in place for them. So creating this actually helps both sides. The amendment that was spoken of to charge the party in a DV case, so when an attacker is charged and you have something credible and they to be able to submit the amendment to be able to charge the attacker or the person that is highly, sorry, I'm a little bit, I hate having to bring this stuff up, but you know I'm usually way more articulate, but that's a crappy thing to have to bring up, I'm sorry. But that's how bad it is to take someone who's this articulate and make them unable to speak. Imagine someone who can't stand up on their feet trying to navigate that situation. So putting protections like this in place is huge. I'm able to speak to it after if you'd like. I can go into the minor details of it, of why it's important and what other protections are there. But just remember Travis, who lived on a 3rd floor apartment, who lost his place immediately, and those people in those situations fleeing. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will recognize David Klein. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing me. My name is David Klein. I'm a small landlord with my buildings on the seacoast. I have not studied the amendment. I haven't even actually seen it, so that it's difficult for us to really speak to the amendment. And that's why I was speaking to the main bill. I do disagree thoroughly with Representative Horrigan. He said the original bill should pass as is. The answer is no. There are too many ambiguities, too many problems with it. The fact that Senator Reed herself is presenting this amendment, trying to deal with some of those problems, say how bad that original bill is, particularly regarding the language on the disability people where it says that an apartment is no longer enjoyable. There's no clear-cut who has to provide the documentation as to whether somebody's disabled versus the amendment. From what I heard of Representative Reed's testimony is now we're dealing with a medical provider and not anybody off the street. So my first point is please don't pass the original bill. Let us study the amendment. Let us try and get back to you in written testimony because I'm assuming there will not be a secondary hearing before you on the amendment before any decisions are made, and we will try and get to it. I'm assuming you won't exect it for 7 days or something of that nature, and try and get back to you as quickly as possible. I do want to reiterate that something that Nick Norman said, most landlords recognize if we have a bad situation, even if it's an unhappy tenant, and I had one who was unhappy about maintenance. We even offered him a month's rent to leave early and break his lease, and he turned us down. We don't want those people in the building. They cause problems for other tenants. It's totally disruptive. It hurts our reputation overall. One domestic violence situation I had where I couldn't get the person out until we went through the eviction process was we had a 3rd floor of the building. They had a newborn baby. The 2 people were fighting on the 1st floor. You could imagine what the parents on the 3rd floor were going through trying to get that baby to sleep with these people fighting. So that we want those out of there because we lose good tenants. And we don't want them, and we work hard to get them out, and we'll make deals. The bill only, it doesn't help that much. I don't think it's that often. And most landlords, if they are thinking it through, let's get the situation behind us as quickly as possible, both to avoid a victim from being hurt, stalked, emotionally affected, and also for our own peace of mind, as well as protecting our own tenants. So I don't feel the building is as needed as it's made to sound like. But again, let us have an opportunity to refer to the amendment. Let us look through it. There are some things that I know that Representative Reed spoke about, like the language I was talking about on the disability, that I'd like to take a hard look at before I can really comment intelligently. And thank you for your time. I'll take any questions.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 261? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 261. And I would like a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.